I appreciate it. It's going to be super fun.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am super excited to be here with Ben Philippe today, and thanks everyone for coming and for giving us a few minutes to just get settled and make sure everybody could get here. If you have any questions about like how to get online, or you know anybody who's having trouble, just have them respond to one of the emails that went out this morning, and I'll help them out. So my name is Jackie with Hub City Bookshop, and I'm going to do an introduction for Ben, and then he's going to talk to us for a little bit about his book, Sure, I'll Be Your Black Friend. If you want to buy the book, there's a little button on the bottom there to purchase from our website, which has free shipping today, so that'll be fun. And then if you have a question, ask it in the chat, or just like a comment or something. Feel free to just chat in the chat window there, or ask a question. And you can vote on people's questions. So if somebody else asks a question that you want to know the answer to, just vote it to the top, and we'll start with that one. So first up, Ben Philippe is a New York-based writer and screenwriter born in Haiti and raised in Montreal, Canada. He has a Bachelor of Arts from Columbia University and an MFA in Fiction and Screenwriting from the Michener Center for Writers in Austin, Texas. He also teaches film studies and screenwriting at Barnard College. He is the author of the William C. Morris award-winning novel, The Field Guide to the North American Teenager. And of course, today we'll be talking to him about the book, Sure, I'll Be Your Black Friend. And thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me. Hey. I will jump in and start talking. As you said, my name is Ben Philippe, and I'm the author of Sure, I'll Be Your Black Friend. It's my first nonfiction memoir. And before that, I had written 2 young adult novels. And, you know, I love writing young adult literature. I think part of it is because I'm emotionally stunted, I've been told. So that like stories that take place within a high school and then resolve at the prom, and people have like all their feelings textually spoken, just feel right to me. Like, I think part of it is like my emotional growth that should have happened in high school happened when I was older in life, like in my early 20s. My high school in a Haitian one-parent home was mostly being home during the weekends. I was that teenager who very much remember just watching SNL, like pretty much like 6 out of 7 Saturday nights throughout the year. But yeah, I really enjoy writing YA. And I think as I was writing YA, one comment or something that popped up often was that people said, "Oh, we love your voice. This character sounds exactly like you." And people would say that, you know, as a compliment, like, "Oh, it feels like I'm really hearing the author's voice." And they would say, and my friends would say that as a diss, like, "I'm not going to read a 300-page book written by you, Ben. I know you. I text with you all day. So I already have your voice in my head." But to me as an author, it just felt slightly off, because I was like, no, I feel like my voice is different. Like, the first young adult protagonist I wrote was Norris Kaplan, who is this moody, snarky teenager who moves from Canada to the middle of Austin, Texas, and hates everyone in his high school, and is just very snarky and abrasive, and uses that as, you know, the self-defense mechanism to keep people away. And those are some traits I have, but I do feel like I'm less snarky than Norris. And the second protagonist I wrote was Henry, who's the child of Haitian immigrants, lives in New York City for the novel Charming as a Verb. And he is just super charming. He's someone who sort of like, even though he's the son of the janitor, he's kind of figured out the code to life. And it's just to charm his way through it and smile and just always be basically in interview mode. And I think I can tap into that mode too. I've gotten jobs before, but I do feel like my own voice is different. So as I was writing these 2 books, I think I just started to like develop the urge to write as Ben. I was just like, occasionally it would just be, well, at first it was like mountains and mountains of tweets. And then it was like, well, let me try writing an essay. Well, let me try writing another essay. And then after you have 10, 15, 19 essays, you can like copy paste all of them together into one Word document. And you kind of have a book partial. And that is how sort of like this book came to be. I did feel some, not shame, some cringe about being like a 32-year-old writing a memoir. Like, am I really, really that person? Like, I've never been to war. I've never really saved the world or like I didn't feel like I had lived a life worthy of a book. So that was like a little cringe factor. I think like when you go to bookstores, there's always that book that's like a memoir from a messy 20 something that maybe if it's a woman, she's at a wedding, like holding cake in one hand and like a pair of pumps in the other. I feel like this is low-key that memoir. Truly, this is my version of that memoir. Except that I've been Black in a lot of white spaces throughout my life. So even in Haiti, where I was born and raised until I was about 5, my parents were upper class, Haitian upper class, which just means like lower middle class once you go to North America. But I went to the kindergarten with all the white kids. And back then, that was because my parents wanted me to network with white people, to be more well-connected. And then when we moved to Canada, we moved to the town of Sherbrooke, Quebec. I was the Black kid in my entire elementary school. Like, it was a big thing that like, oh, they're getting a Black kid in January. And it was actually not that bad. I think racism is something that's learned. We learn, like, young people hit a point where they realize that, oh, some of us are different, and that's a bad thing. But when I got there in the 2nd grade, like, it was like, yeah, I touch your hair. Yeah. Okay, yay, we're best friends for 4 years. So I got that part of it, and then I also got the later, hey, you're Black. You come from monkeys. Do you have weed? I got those experiences too. And then finally, when I finally moved to America, it was for college at the age of 18. It was to go to college here in New York City at Columbia University, which I was very, very happy about. I always wanted to live in New York City. Blame Gossip Girl. But even then, it was sort of like, race is just different. It hits different in America. I say in the book that like the experience of being a Black boy in Haiti and a Black teenager in Canada had not prepared me to be a Black man in America. And it's just sort of dealing with life, dealing with your 20s, college, the post-college. Ooh, I want to be a writer. And the last section of the book was written last year in the middle of like the racial reckoning moment we were having in 2020. And I think part of it resulted in those few chapters being very angry, very I don't know, a little, not despondent, but sort of like discouraged at the state of the world. And is like, is any of it ever going to get better? I think I know this is wrong. Okay, I know this is wrong. But one fantasy I had about race in America was that there was this very nice man named Martin Luther King Jr. And when he died, he solved racism, which is why we have a day off on the calendar. I really thought like that. I think unconsciously I thought like this was America. So coming into this country and sort of like learning my identity, learning Black history here was also an adjustment. And I think one thing that comes with Blackness is that sometimes people just assume you have all the answers. Like, I didn't know who Maya Angelou was until I was like 25. Oh, that's not 22. But basically, I had to learn it the same as anyone else. So I think like sometimes when we like to say like, read a book about this. I had to read the books. I had to learn the Black history, Black culture that way too. And, I had to learn to converse with a lot of white people who looked to me for the quote unquote answers that I didn't have. It led to uncomfortable conversations. It led to like great, amazing conversations. And I just write about them within the book too. I drag a couple of my white friends. I still love them. I love them dearly. I was recently, I know like this is what happens because you gave me like 20 minutes to just talk. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna talk for 20 minutes. I'm a professor. I talk for 3 hours to a room of 100 people who did not do the reading. I was recently confronted by one of the friends in the book and from chapter 1, the character of Marty. Marty's not a reader. Like I think he has like 3 books in his apartment and it's just to show his dates that he has like, look, I have 3 books in my apartment. But he read my book and we're just grabbing like post-COVID, like, hey, we can see each other socially in a socially distanced manner. We're just grabbing drinks and it was like, so the character of Marty. And I was just like shook to the core of my being because, if you're writing a character, if you're taking 3 lines that one of your friends told you when they were drunk and using that as a prompt to write a full essay about. You're not capturing their full essence. So I do think that writing nonfiction is different from writing fiction. Whenever I have like writing students, they're always like, I feel kind of weird writing about my family because, you know, is it my place to tell their story? And before writing this book, right there, I used to be like, no, if it happened to me, the event, the experience belongs to me. I get to write about it. I was very sort of selfish in my writing process that way. After writing this book, I'm like, maybe I should run a few chapters by people before. 2 chapters mostly that I would run by people. But aside from that, it's still mostly the same. I hope people will read it. I hope that it gives not the complete picture of me, but a full picture of me. And also a full picture of the conception of race. If there's one last quote unquote serious thing I'll say about this book is that I wrote it to be funny. There are a lot of jokes in there by design, just to be a good time. But I think race, the big fiction around race is that it's very, very simple. That like, you should not be a racist. You should have black friends and we'll have an amazing progressive society. But I think there's so much discomfort that we just don't look at. And I like discomfort. I just think it's fun when people are like, oh boy, should we be talking about this? Yes. In fact, I'm going to write a book about it. So I think that's what I try to capture too. So the book changes in tone somewhat. Like it goes from really, really funny zingers and listicles to like personal essays about falling in love and getting your heart broken to like a few essays I think I wrote when I was depressed. In hindsight, in editing, you could be like, oh, wow, I was really depressed. To like really angry when writing about race in America last summer. But hopefully it's a full picture of the complexities that come with discussing race and identity.
Very cool. Thank you so much for telling us about it. For anyone who hasn't read it, it's a wonderful read. It also sucks you right in. So like there's not a boring page in that book. You'll have to finish reading it once you start it. So actually one of our commenters up here, Maggie, said something about that. Impossible to put down.
Oh yeah, thank you so much.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that part with Marty, if you don't mind. Because I was reading that and I was like, I wonder if his friend saw this. So now we know he did. How did the book change? You mentioned a little bit like it became a little bit angrier as like events progressed in the country. Did it change from your initial conception of the book, like how you imagined it would be versus how it turned out, and what did you really want to keep the same?
It definitely changed as I was writing it because I was unpacking stuff. I thought I think when you're a minority or you're just going through the world, you feel like, oh, I have a pretty strong grasp of my blackness, of my identity, so I navigate the world this way. But when you write about something, you really have to think about it. It's sort of like you're taking stuff that is like written in ink, you're turning it into like pencil, you're erasing it and you're tracing over it again. Like you're really revisiting your own experiences. And sometimes I was like, did anything happen during college? And I think of one event. I was like, oh, wow, I still remember that like shockingly well. And then like, oh, wow, that was actually really traumatic. Oh, wow, I just wrote like 4,000 words about it. So I think it's just a little emotionally draining to write nonfiction. And I think, the big change was that last year, America exploded out of nowhere. We're in the middle of the pandemic, and then we're going to have this big racial reckoning. And for a while, I did consider, not fudging, but like not writing directly about it. So I'm still writing about race, writing about like my life without sort of like putting a time stamp on it. But some of the biggest, like most defining moments about race that were happening in my life, the biggest, like, I like to say that it was kind of like a software update to my racial identity in America, like were happening in live. So I was writing them without the gift of, hindsight. So I think that is how the book changed most drastically. A lot of it kind of stays the same. My dad was always who he was, loved my mom, my friends, all that stuff. But I think it was just like that calendar year of 2020 that ended up changing the most.
So most of the essays were written more from, it sounds like, a very hindsight moment where you didn't realize how much some of the things had affected you, but those last few chapters were very like in the present moment, basically. Interesting. Oh, yeah. And was there something that you wanted that was like the core of the book that you wanted to stay the same regardless of like what specific stories you put in it? Like what were you hoping most, I guess, for your readers to come away with?
It feels silly when I say this, but I really wanted the reader to sort of come away thinking of me as a friend. And, people say, oh, that's nice. But I'm like, we don't like all our friends. Like there are friends I have that I'm like, you're exhausting. I can do like 20 minutes with you every 2 months and that's it. And there are friends that I have that are just like, oh, let's trade book recommendations. Kidding. It's never like friendships aren't simple, they're layered. So when I say I wanted the reader to think of me as a friend, I really do mean like there are times where I share stories like, oh, I'm just venting about the world. There are times where I'm like uncovering trauma from my childhood. There are times where I'm oversharing. There are times I'm just like, oh, here are some book recommendations. So I really wanted to like capture all the notes you can hit within a friendship. There's one essay that's in there that's about dating that like I know for a fact that a couple of my friends who I love dearly who've read the book were like, yeah, you were a douche in that essay. I was like, I still stand by that philosophy. So I really wanted to give the reader the space to have all those feelings about me and not to just be like, I support this young Black author voice. Like to just like, no, think of me as a more complex creature than just like the good Black person you support. Like it's okay to get angry at me. It's okay to want to challenge me. And that level of interiority that hopefully you get by the end of the book, it exists within every Black person in America. So I think if by the end of the book you're like, man, Ben is really complicated and messy and I don't know if I like him, well, you should afford that level of like interiority to a Black teenager with like baggy pants, to like a Black person that is walking down the street. Every Black body in this land deserves that level of interiority. So I think that was the lofty thesis of this book.
And you do kind of allude to that a little bit in the book where you're talking about you're kind of being the token person in a couple of these instances where you feel like you're their token Black friend, or they bring you to a place just to be seen with you or something like that. Do you think that kind of relates to your point where like you want to be seen as more than that? You want to be seen as everything that you are, not just that one thing.
Yeah. And I think, even that takes permutations that are like fun, lighter, and some that are more serious. On the light side of things, like when I was in my mid-20s, I had like I would say that like within a certain like zip code of Austin, Texas, it was impossible to swipe on guys without seeing me as in like the profile of at least like 6 white guys that I was friends with. But they all felt like, oh, I need to have a photo that shows that I'm like a diverse person so that I have diverse friends. So my girlfriend at the time was like, you're on the profile of all these guys, right? You're the Black friend. Are you for rent as the Black friend? I was like, no, I'm not. It's just them like not having other Black friends. Strange, weird. I made fun of them about that. And then on the more serious side of things, I think, again, it all goes back to 2020. Like, I was the Black person that some people felt comfortable saying things to that I thought were kind of wild. Like, I had friends, acquaintances, people I'm friendly with, former coworkers who would just like send me DMs, and they're nice people, they're good people. The Instagram Black Square was right up there. But they would send me DMs being like, don't you think they're going too far, taking down the statues? Like, do you really feel offended by this or that? And it was sort of like, oh, I'm the Black friend that they have so that they don't have to question like race in America or like how they go through their everyday lives. Because in the back of their mind, and not maliciously, like those are people I like if I was dangling from a cliff, they would pull me up, presumably, hopefully. But just, I existed as like permission not to looked at systematic like forces of oppression, and that was kind of a bummer. And so there were a couple of people I was like, all right, that's kind of what I signed up for. I'm one of your few Black friends. I could tell you to F off right now, or we could have the conversation. And part of that is not a lofty social engagement on my part because I'm Canadian, truly. But it was really like, I really like you as a person, and I know you're a nice person. So yeah, I kind of wish you'd figured this out on your own. Yeah, I kind of wish that like you would read. I don't think White Fragility is that good of a book. I'm sorry. It's totally fine that you read a book about racism. I just don't think that's the best one. But I was just, anyway, I digress. I was just like, no, all right, we'll have the conversation because I think maybe you're more likely to change your mind about a few things if we have the conversation than if I just like say, wow, that was really problematic and block them forever. I think a lot about the fact that like now when we're making fun of quote unquote Karens, or like when we're making fun of like racist, like unaware people, we make fun of the sentence like, I don't see color. Like if somebody says like, oh, I don't see race, I don't see color. We're like, that's messed up. You should. I'm old enough, bravely 32, to remember that like that wasn't always the case. I very much remember when that was the right answer. That like that saying that meant that like, oh, you judge a man by the strength of his character. You judge a person by what they do, not what they look like. And that was like the good social media trained answer. But that's changed. And the reason that changed was because we had those uncomfortable conversations. So I always just make myself available to have these conversations to people I care about. If I don't care about you, I might ignore your DM. If you're being rude, I'll just like block you. But yeah, that was, am I answering the question?
Yeah. I liked it. It was answering a statement with a lot of information that I was going to ask you questions about. So it was perfect. Okay. The other thing that was kind of related to that I had was in the front, I think it's the first chapter, you have a list of questions that are like very basic questions that you've received a lot or that you feel are things that shouldn't be said. What made you include that list? I love that you kind of included in that list whether or not you felt like it deserved an answer. Because one of them was like a velociraptor dropping a pin in the next room or something like that. I thought that was hilarious. But some of them you like really were like, no, I'll take the time to answer this. And other ones were, you shouldn't ever ask this question. So what made you include those particular questions?
I think it's just that the same way I want the reader to think of me as a friend, I don't assume, or I didn't assume that the person picking up this book was racist. I just didn't. I assumed like, oh, this is whoever's reading this book, if they finish it, they're going to know a lot about my life. They're going to know like just all the daddy issues. They're going to know about like my childhood. They're going to know about my education, how I lost my virginity. They're going to know all of it. So I'm just going to assume that they're friendly, that we're at least starting at friendly. And I think establishing those things right off the bat just like lets you know, hey, here are the boundaries of this friendship, right? If you meet someone at a bar and you have a new coworker, it's a happy hour and you're chit-chatting, if they suddenly headbutt you, you're not going to have a friendship anymore. So this was just like my way of like, hey, let's avoid headbutting each other. And here is this sort of black guy, quote unquote, you're getting if you're striking a friendship with me. And I think it's just visually, bear with me here, the idea of this book had to do with like starting with an outline of a black person and like adding in like myself into it, shades and like voice and personality, so that by the end of the book, you could no longer look at this thing and just say that like, oh, that's every black person. I'm a very, very specific person. I like myself, not everyone might. And I just wanted to sort of like establish that right off the bat. And I have actually seen on a question of like, you know, why did I want to just start by answering the big no-nos and just like going forward? I've some of those conversations I've just had with people. And I remember someone like if I meet an acquaintance and they're like getting a little drunk, getting a little tipsy, and they're like, dude, why can't I say the N-word? Instantly in my mind, I'm like, oh, No, that was a bummer. I don't think we're going to become best friends. I would have liked to be close friends with you, but now that friendship's hit a sour note. So I wanted to avoid the sour notes at the beginning. And I also think that the people asking those questions, again, aren't always malicious. Sometimes they're malicious. Someone sliding into your DM to call you the N-word, malicious, we'll agree. But like someone, there was a video on Twitter like 3 years ago. That was an older white-haired white woman was in line at like a deli, and there was a black woman next to her. A younger black woman was like 20 something who had long braids. And the white woman just like went over to the hair and just like lovingly touched it and just appreciated the texture. Now, your face, my face, yes, we all know that that's a bad one. And in the video, like the black woman did not like pop off on this woman. She did not yell at her, but she was very stern and she was like, hey, I'm in a good mood today. Please don't do that to people. And the white woman was just like, oh, I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to. And I buy that she really didn't know. Like, it's one of those few instances I'm like, you're not that like age is a permission ever, but it was one of those like, you're from an older generation. The same way you touched this woman's hair, the same way you might have touched like a fun jacket. And that is problematic and that it should not happen. But I just like, in that clip, in that moment, I saw that this woman's intentions weren't bad. And I think it just like, I don't know, that clip stayed with me. And I'm just like, I'm not going to assume that people who do those things, who ask those questions, are necessarily malicious. So I think that was what shaped the first paragraph, the first chapter. And as you're realizing, my life is people saying one sentence and then I say 17 sentences. I am so sorry. I will try to contain it.
I love it. We're here to talk about your book, so that's what I wanted. And it was kind of a little bit when you were describing your responses to those questions, I loved how you had your kind of internal thoughts and then what you would actually say. Like, this is how I'm responding to it, but this is how, because I'm a nice person, I'm going to actually answer your question as an honest question. And we get that a lot throughout the book. You have a kind of like I want to say, I don't know you very well, but it's a characteristic bluntness that you have about the book. But you put like a lot of this really endearing humor in it that makes you feel like your friend. So when you're talking about how you did your characters for your young adult novels and how you wanted this one to be truly your real personality, how did you know when to put those different aspects into it? And was that like an editing thing, or was that while you were writing it that happened?
Thank you so much for like the kind words about my writing. It wasn't an editing thing. I think I just like, that's how I wrote. And for me, I think if I was going to write a memoir, the way this was going to feel different from fiction is that it wasn't going to be edited, meaning that I'm just going to dump everything on it and then we'll just like trim it, make it pretty, formatted correctly in the editing process. But I just wanted to share everything. And I do think that one trait that is often assigned to like Black males in the media, in books, TV shows, movies, is just pure, like unvarnished, unfiltered confidence. Like whether you call it swagger, you call it cool, like Black guys are just cool. And I spent 20 years trying to figure out what the code of cool was. I never figured it out. And I just wanted to be like, oh, I could write a version of this where I'm like, portraying myself as the cool Black friend throughout high school and throughout my 20s, but I wasn't that person. I was the person who was super insecure, super self-conscious, super embarrassed to be, not embarrassed to be foreign, but yeah, maybe kind of embarrassed to be foreign. Just like I remember sort of like being in middle school and like classmates smelling my clothes and my clothes smell like Haitian food, like spicy Haitian fish. Because we lived in a really small apartment and my mom had cooked and done the ironing like right next to each other. And now that I'm an adult, the thing I see in that story is that, you know, she was a very lonely woman brought to this country she didn't like or understand, who was like cooking for her family and also ironing the clothes of her son. The thing that teenage Ben saw in that moment was that, how you sent me to school smelling like like, Fish, I hate you. I remember storming into the apartment at like 4 p.m. and just like screaming at her because of this had happened. But I wanted to share that too, like the discomfort, the messy parts. I was a plus size boy. I don't know what the correct term is these days. Chubby. I was chubby in like high school. And I very much remember like, oh, when I had a crush on someone, I would wear one undershirt under my polo. And when that wasn't enough, I would scotch tape like the protuberance of man boobs on top of the undershirt under the polo. In hindsight, I could have just gone jogging. I discovered jogging in college. I could have like embraced fitness, but I had all these like visual tricks to slip myself. But like that's an insecurity that I was like, if you're gonna know me, if I'm gonna paint a picture of my life when I was a teenager, that's gonna be a part of it. So I think that's how the unfilteredness came out.
That's really incredibly honest. I don't know a lot of people who know themselves well enough to talk like that about themselves, especially not in a book. So yeah, you're really getting to know you. The other thing that we kind of were talking about before, and then I'll make sure to get to questions if anybody has questions, was we were talking about how being a minority or feeling separated by your race was also, there were other aspects of your life where you felt similarly sequestered or alone that weren't necessarily racial based. We were talking about you have like foreign kid or the coworker or the student or the something else that set you aside. How do those compare to each other and how do they intersect for you?
I think there was always a lot of like overlap. I'm a writer now. It's wild that I get to say that like, oh, when I fill my taxes, the job is writer. Because for the longest time that felt like something I wouldn't be able to do. Part of that was that like my parents were Haitian immigrants. I'm not even like first generation. It's generation 0. I looked it up on Wikipedia because I was confused by it. But just the idea of pursuing a career in the arts, that was something that like set me aside from my family and even like relatives and other people I knew. I lied to my mom and said I was getting like a bachelor in economics. And I majored in creative writing and sociology. In my defense, she wasn't paying for it. I got a scholarship and her primary language is French and not English. So she didn't super know until the end. And at the end, she was like, how are you going to find a job? You wasted this opportunity. I was like, don't worry, I got into grad school. So I feel like that is something like now that I'm a teacher or professor myself, I get students who are like, well, I'm 18 and I've been writing for 10 years. And they're not lying. They've just like, it's something they've always done. And they've always sort of like seen this as the path that they wanted. That was an identity where I didn't always feel like my artistic pursuit fit in with the world around me. Here's another one, because this is now officially just therapy. I was actually very, very shy all through college. And I'm not doing that thing where people say like, I'm an introvert. No, like I just would not talk. I remember I had seminars where like the teacher was like, your essays are fine. Your exams are good. It's just that you don't talk in class and there's like 20% for participation. So when I make meaningful eye contact with you, you should say something like a couple of times throughout the semester. And I would just be like, how many times? And they'd be like, I don't know, 4 or 5. And I would just like count the dates that like, I'm going to speak 4 times throughout the semester. And that came from me being really self-conscious about my accent. That was something that kind of hit me like a truck when I first moved to America. That, I talk funny here. Just like, it's not I would say that on a scale from 1 to 10, my accent is maybe a 3 or 4. Like, it's not a barrier to understanding English or being understood, but it was just something I was self-conscious about. Like standing up in a lecture to ask a question, I just would not do it. And it led to me not talking for months. And so that was another way I felt apart from the rest of the world. And when I say the story, but like, it is physically impossible to shut you up now. How? When did that change? And I think for me, it was just play acting. It's weird, but like if you fake something, eventually it becomes the truth. I was just like, I'm going to be talkative today. Once, I think it was at the lowest point. I was like, I don't know anyone in this city. When I moved to Texas, I was like, if I don't talk to people, I'll just never meet people. So I just like pretended to be talkative, and it just kind of happened. And this became the default me, a new monster. But yeah, the accent barrier for a couple of years was strong. And I think also, yeah, politically, I would say I'm not. I've become opinionated when before I used to not be opinionated. And I have family members here in the United States who are like lean conservative, lean black and conservative. And I'm like, ooh, that's okay. It used to be totally okay. But it was like, I might vote for Trump again. I'm like, all right, I'm going to be the person that makes this dinner party awkward. Sorry, Auntie Louisa. So I think that all those things put me at odds with the world, and my blackness sort of like comes in and out of it. And one last thing I'll say. I think because of my YA books, I got the label of Black Boy Joy. Like Black Boy Joy as a single hashtag very early, because that's applied to young adult books with Black protagonists who are male, and the stories don't deal with like gun violence or death or oppression or like Dear Martin, The Hate You Give. It's a different sort of like, who's he gonna go to the prom with story. And I kind of wrestled with that for a little while, because it was like, first of all, I was happy people were just like buying my book, but I was just like, I'm one of the most whiny, moody, insecure, angry people in the world. So just having the word like joy stamped on my head, just like, okay, I feel like crying right now. So that was another sort of like area of discomfort with the world.
So your YA books are not specifically addressing race. They're about these young men who are Black, just experiencing life, correct?
Correct.
And so that's where I was trying to make sure I knew the difference there between why the hashtag is like that. I haven't heard of that one before. So
I didn't think it was like a thing either, but it was just like, I think it's because a lot of times when you write about the Black experiences, people look at like, not even just like the quote unquote bad parts of it, but they look at like the struggles, because there's like a narrative built into struggle. Like if you're going to write a book, a story about a character, the guy who had to grow up like in the projects and face racism and all that stuff, that's like a built-in story. And I think there are a lot of them. Justin A. Reynolds, there's like so many other YA authors who are amazing at telling the stories, but I think there are fewer of them. And that hashtag or that label sort of like serves to like categorize them. The same way you have like LGBTQ books. Like it was just another different label.
Well, speaking of, I guess, attitudes or joy, Heather asks if you've ever done stand-up comedy.
I did live storytelling once, because as a 20-something in New York City, I thought, I have to tell a story at the Moth. It was like when I discovered that like, I can actually speak up. So I was like, I just moved back to New York City. I'm going to go to the Moth and UCB, and I'm just going to tell a story. And it was a disaster. It was truly an awful, awkward experience. I think part of the reason Heather's asking is because of this brick wall in my apartment, which is where all my Zooms take place. I had to like get a mirror in the corner because my coworker says it looks like I'm at the bottom of a well. But yeah, I don't think I have the emotional stability needed to do stand-up comedy, because I know some stand-up comics. I have some friends who like do it, and they're very much like, I bombed 4 times tonight, but my last show was really good. I'm like, if one person just sighs at me or checks their phone, I would be catatonic in the bathroom and sad. So I don't have the emotional bandwidth to be a stand-up comic.
I didn't think about that. That must be really hard if you're not getting like the immediate response that you're looking for.
They're just feral. Like people who make it, like they go to classes, they go to open mics like 4 or 5 times a night. They just commit to it. It's like going to the gym for them, and they sort of have like this. It's not even like getting booed. Getting booed is a form of attention. I think it would just be like the wild indifference of people on their phone, like trying to have a conversation over you while you're doing stand-up comedy. I can do it.
But you're comfortable in front of a room now, though. You teach, right? So how's that for you, like as opposed to other things that you've done in the past, or like as opposed to writing? Do you like being up in front of the classroom or talking to them, or?
Yeah, it's really, really fun. I just wrapped up my last semester teaching full time just because now like TV writing is taking over and I just didn't have time to do both. I thought when I first started to teach, I was going to teach like one class per semester in the evening or maybe per year for like one semester to like tide me over financially while I was changing day jobs. I ended up doing it for 5 years, and after 2 years, it became my full-time job. I really, really like it. I think there are some writers who like get drained. First of all, I teach cool stuff. I teach like writing and TV writing and screenwriting. So that part's awesome. I just make people watch the movies I love. And I'm like, yeah, here's my 200 slide PowerPoint about the social network. But I think there are some writers who are like, get drained being around other people's stories. Like, oh, I have to give notes on like 30 pages of bad fiction or bad writing. Is like, oh, I don't have time to write after. For me, it's the opposite, because like the young people, the next generation, the kids, like they're super, super into it, and they're figuring it out like in front of you, and I don't know, their enthusiasm for writing, it's kind of infectious. So when you have someone who just got workshopped and they're like annoying you in your office hours for like 40 minutes and you just want to go home, but they're like, oh yeah, when I get home, I'm going to take notes. And when you get home, you already have an email of notes from them of like what they're doing with their own stories. It's very like encouraging to keep doing this. Like the passion is just like, yeah, it's a little contagious. So I really, really enjoyed it. Any job, there are parts of it you don't like at the end. I never want to teach a big lecture again, because you just get emails by like wealthy, privileged children who are like, I got a 17 out of 20 in this, but I really think it deserves a 19 out of 20. I'm like, oh my God, I don't care. I don't care. Here's 2020. Just never email me again. Go away. But yeah, I really love the workshops and seminars.
That's really cool. Especially just like how your face lights up when you talk about it. Kyla, she's one of our staff members, and she's actually in a master's for screenwriting. She has a question. She asked, what was your motivation to put these pieces together into this book for the world?
Oh, I don't know. I felt like I had something to say, which is very good question. Very existential question. My first book was that I was out of an MFA and I was wanting to be a writer, and it just sort of, I lucked out that it was a 2-book contract. So like after I was like exhausted from the first one, they're like, well, you owe us a second one. I was like, okay. Also, I want the money. So, okay. This one, I think it was just because I wanted to write about things that couldn't be contained in fiction and couldn't be contained in YA. And YA is amazing. I love the umbrella of it because you can write anything. I think the only 2 rules of quote unquote YA are, first, your protagonist has to be a teenager. Like anyone under 18, anything like that can be YA. So like I know people who've written like stories with people in college, and they're like, oh, well, the editor's buying my book, but I have to turn that college into a prep school. So that's like the only change, just turned 18 into 16. And the other change is that you can't write about sex, which is not to say that this is like a super horny book of like sex stories. I think there's like one chapter where I talk about losing my virginity. But I wanted to write that chapter. So I just wanted to like flex beyond just like fiction and just like encompass my experiences throughout my 20s. So I think that was the motivation for it. I think the next one's gonna be fiction again. People yell at you less when you write fiction, so I'm gonna go with that one.
Do you want to talk at all about people's responses to the book that you've had? I'm sure you've had some positive and some negative. If you don't want to talk about that, that's fine.
Oh no. No, let's talk about it. I've had I've had a lot of positive response. I think it's really transparent to write nonfiction. I know that's a very trite observation, but like you're like, oh, someone on my Instagram DMs is like, wow, my dad was an asshole too. I'm like, I don't know you. How do you know this about me? I was like, oh, well, Ben, you wrote 300 words about it and it's on shelves out there. So I think it's just sort of like very vulnerable in that sense. So, but that's been really great for people to sort of like just get the real you, because I think something that happens in fiction is like, oh wow, for example, like the father characters are so layered. What was your relationship with your father? And you have to be like, well, Jacqueline, not great. It wasn't great. But like here, the book is just there, so they can read it and then you get the reply. And on the unfun side of things, I think there was a bit of backlash makes it sound bigger than it was. Something I wrote in the book was taken out of context very early. And I think when you write about race, just emotions go from like 2 to like an 8 right away. And that's for everyone. When I pick up a book that's about race, my emotions like are higher. But it was just like the idea of, there's a chapter in the book that's called Race Wars. And I wrote it after going to a George Floyd protest in 2020. And there was a drunk man on the subway who was like saying that we shouldn't do this. He was white, Caucasian, but he was drunk and was saying like, this ends in a race war. Like if we did all this stuff, that's going to be bad. Like we're stirring waters that shouldn't be stirred. And I just thought about that and wrote about that. And the idea is that we have to talk about it. We have to be involved in those uncomfortable discussions. Otherwise, the alternative is that it does end in a race war. And even though I'm an quote unquote Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside, which is something that a label they give you in high school if you know how to quote Gilmore Girls, I'm a black person. So if the world dissolves into like a race war, I'm going to be black fighting versus white people. And it's painted as this horrible dystopia. Daenerys Targaryen is flying in the skies, and I'm like tying bombs to myself and exploding. It's very much like a ghoulish picture. And the call to action at the end of that paragraph is like, we have to fix the pastor's dream, because otherwise this is what the world is going to look like. But like the tiny excerpt of me blowing up my white friends was taken out. I was like, oh, he wants to gas and kill all white people. Well, I guess the black people are the real racists in the room. So that, like, you know, as soon as that hits Twitter and Reddit, it's just taken in bad faith. But I will, and the internet is a very well-oiled machine for people who are just a bad faith. Like if you have one person you want to target, you just post their name and email on like one subreddit, and you'll immediately have like, I don't know, 200 people emailing that person death threats and like slurs for a couple of weeks. So that's a bummer. But so that was the bummer. That was like the bad side of it, because I think anyone who writes, period. I was going to say anyone who writes nonfiction, but I think anyone who writes, you're writing to be understood. You're writing because you're like, there's this thing that's in my head, but I feel like I want it out into the world. I want to share it with people. So to be like purposefully misunderstood and painted with something so ugly, like, you don't honestly think I want to kill all white people. That can't possibly be what you think. Was a bummer, like the volume of it, and they were calling my school to have me fired. Because I think what added fire to it was like, this liberal college professor actually wants to gas all white people. And so that was like I had never dealt with anything like that before. Like being a YA author, like I think the most annoying thing that used to happen in my private messages was like students who had my books assigned and didn't do the homework were just emailing me their questions. And so it would be like, hey, what was the thesis of Norris Kaplan's arc? So that used to be my annoyance. And then it became like 400 people saying they're gonna, sexually assault my mom and taking screenshots of her and really ugly, unpleasant stuff. So that was like the flip side of it. But to quote Taylor Swift, I got harder in the nick of times. Honey, I rose up from the dead. I do it all the time. It was totally okay. It passed. And the weird thing, 2 good things that came out of it. The first one is that there is no one that some people just reached out like, hey, do you really want to kill and gas all white people? And I would just like copy paste the page from the book and send it to them. And that happened like, I don't know, 10, 20 times. No one that I did that with ever like continued to think I wanted to kill all white people. Like some of them were still like, oh, well, that's the liberal media these days. They twist your words. This is why you should be conservative. I'm like, nope, that's not going to happen. But I think like it just sort of reaffirmed something that, no, I did not write this. That the fact that as soon as somebody read just not even the full essay, but the full page, they were able to get the full picture of what I was trying to say. So that was really sort of like reaffirming in a way. And also I made friends with like one really nice white nationalist. And we're still friends. I want to write an essay about it because it's very bizarre. Because if you go on his Instagram, Greg, if you're watching this, what's up? He has like a bunch of like, MAGA, Blue Lives Matter. He has like all the typical iconography that you would expect. And then he messaged me. His avatar was like a skull on fire. Like, sir, do you want to gas and kill all the whites? I was like, no, but I'm tired. People have been calling me the N-word all day. I will just try to explain it to you. So I just like sent him uploaded the PDF of the essay. I sent it to him. He read it. He was like, oh, I'm really sorry you're going through that. Yeah, that didn't seem like you. You have a lot of pictures of cute dogs on your Instagram. And then we just got and I was like, oh, thank you, Greg. And I was like, yeah, no, and he's like, how you doing? I'm like, good. It's been a rough day, but also like, I've been trying to grow plants and they're all dying too. So it feels like I have a death touch for my books and plants. I was like, oh, I'm a gardener. Oh, show me photos of your plants. And I sent him photos of my plants and he sent me seeds in the mail. I was like, is this anthrax? No, it was really seeds. And it just became this like long conversation about gardening that started with like racial conflict about like misquoted attempts to gas and commit genocide. It was just like, the internet is wild. It is, but it's also like, I think why I'm optimistic about it is that people are good and behind every computer screen is a person. So I think that like, if I was able to have an in-depth conversation about gardening with everyone that was like sending me slurs, I think we would all find a point of agreement or they would think I'm an asshole. But I just think the fact that like, ultimately people are good is something I took away from this experience and it could have easily been the other way. So I'm grateful for that. Now for the real question, which I just saw, how Gossip Girl should have ended, it should not have been Dan. I think, for a while, up until season 5, it could have been Nate. Because like there was the thing that they were doing that like Nate never sent a tip to Gossip Girl. And there was not a single scene in which Nate was like receiving, like it could have been Nate. It could have worked that it was Nate. But then there was a ridiculous storyline in season 5 where like he tried to buy the website Gossip Girl, so it could no longer be Nate. So how could it have ended? I think it ended. It ended as soon as they made it about the website again, they kind of screwed themselves over. I don't know. I think it ended the best way it could have. My favorite character was like evil Jenny Humphrey, so my heart was out of it after season 4. But I am very excited for the reboot. If you've seen the trailer on HBO Max, they're all queer, they're all kids of color, they're still super rich and mean, which is the heart of Gossip Girl, and I can't wait for July 9th. I really want to get into it. Like I've never done the thing where you review stuff on Instagram, but I want to watch those episodes and like talk about them with the world, and I'm not on Twitter anymore because of the unpleasantness, but I'm gonna need to talk about Gossip Girl. And their names are stuff like Max Wolf or Julienne Leclerc. And I just, can't wait. Let me get that.
Might have to get back on Twitter just for that, huh?
Seriously.
I have things like that too. I love how you're able to turn your negative comments and stuff for your book into positives and like really connect with people. And I feel like that's like one of the takeaways from your book too, is how you're able to take situations that make people uncomfortable and like turn them into, hey, let's talk about this and become more educated people. So I think that's a really important takeaway as well. What are you working on next? Is there something that we should know about that's upcoming for you?
Ooh, I'm writing for TV these days, and I'm very, very excited because I got to write on the TV show Only Murders in the Building. It's Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. It's not my vision. I'm just like a staff writer in a grid of 12 extremely smart and talented writers. But the trailer came out today, actually, the official trailer, and it's going to start at the end of August. And I'm just excited for people to check it out. It's wild to write for a TV show that's getting made, and like, it's weird. I wrote an episode that has oh crap, am I spoiling? No, I can't spoil the show when the trailer just came out, but in TV writing and script writing, you would just write like interior office day, and there are people who spent thousands of dollars putting together an office and actually taking you that seriously. Whereas when you write fiction, it doesn't really feel like sometimes anyone's listening, really, but like everything you write ends up becoming like something visual, something concrete and solid in the world. So I've seen the episodes. They're so great. I can't wait for people to check it out. And that's what I'm writing right now on the daytime job and script side of things. And I think my next book, which is still at the outlining and notes and sketches, because I have to draw my characters, is going to be a murder mystery. Because I'm a huge fan of Agatha Christie, huge fan. And the David Suchet, like, adaptations. And I would like to write a murder mystery with like Black people, like modern times set in Harlem, a Knives Out type situation, but with like Black teenage characters. So it's gonna be a murder mystery, but it might not come out for like 4 years.
That sounds amazing. Cannot wait. I think that's the link. I didn't want it to play while we were online, so I put a link to something about the show in the chat there.
Such a fun show. It is such a fun show. And it's sorry, the last thing I'll say is that I'm of the generation where like the big, oh crap, they're in a room, virtual room, was like Steve Martin and Martin Short. I was just like, they were the superstars. And when Selena Gomez joined the cast, there are legions of people who were obsessed with her. So suddenly it was just like this bigger thing no one could have predicted. She's the most popular person on Instagram. And I have like my nieces and nephews who are like, oh, cool, you're writing for TV? That's really cool. And then like 4 months later, they would send me like all the exclamation marks, like, it's the Selena Gomez show. Yeah, so it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
That's really exciting. And also like a little bit of a change, it sounds like. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
We don't have any more questions, and it's after 8, so I think I'm good to stop there if you are. I had a really good time talking to you, and I hope that people read your book. It sounds like most of the people who had negative comments about your book really should have read it before they talked to you about it, because that would have solved a lot of their questions.
Honestly, they could have just read like the full paragraph. I'm kind of annoyed with the interviewer for not reading the full paragraph. But yeah, and also please, if you're going to buy my book or any book, really, use the link here. You can use the link and then navigate to a different sort of book you want to buy, because I believe it's free shipping, which is a thing that's happening right now to counter Amazon. What do they call it? Prime Day?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I'm on Amazon too. It's great. I never want to make eye contact with a human being to buy toilet paper ever again. But it really, really, really hurts bookstores. It actively, like, there are bookstores that I used to love in New York City, in Montreal, my hometown, and I'm just like, they're gone now. After COVID, like, they're not coming back. So even though it's not going to magically, no, in this case, it is going to magically appear, like, in your mail. So just use it, because Amazon does not need your money. Just for books, please just use bookstores. That's the only thing. Anything else, I'm not in the industry of toilet paper. Maybe it's really hurting toilet paper too, but I'm like, that's not my fight. My fight is like books. So please buy your books from local amazing bookstores like this.
Thank you. That was so sweet.
Bezos is going to be in my DMs yelling at me now.
And Ben signed book plates with green marker, and they look really good in the book. So
I'm so glad.
Well, thanks so much for talking to us, Ben, and thanks everyone for watching. And we hope to catch you for your next book and watch your show and stuff.
Please. Yes, please do. And what was your cat's name again? Penelope?
Penelope. Sorry for her frequent appearance.
Never apologize for pets. Bye, Penelope. It was so nice talking with you too.
She's right here. All right. Thanks so much, Ben. Have a good rest of your night.
You too. Bye.